Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Weeknights with Wander Gals. I'm Cheryl.
And I'm Mabel. This evening, our guest presenter, Renato, will be sharing about the mystical Greenland. To our audience, have you heard of Greenland before? Or perhaps it's already in your travel list? If your answer is yes, please type Greenland in the comments to let us know. Also, please like and share this broadcast.
Yeah, that's right. Continue to like and share this broadcast. Before we start, allow me to share a little bit about ourselves if you are new to Travel Wander. Travel Wander is a licensed online and offline travel company based in Singapore. We specialize in active holidays. Join us in the future if you are looking for cycling, hiking, or running holidays overseas. We are also good in bespoke travel. We can plan all sorts of vacations that you desire, such as romantic getaways, rest and relaxation trips, or even family fun trips according to your requirement. Our website is www.travel-wander.com. Remember to check us out when you are ready to travel. But right now, we are switching to selling food to eat or drink and products to use for the time being. All the products listed on our website, TW Shop, has been tried and tested personally by Mabel and myself before we bring in to share with all of you. If you are interested in any of the products, feel free to get in touch with us. As you can see, if you notice, there are some coffee behind Mabel's back. Maybe Mabel, you want to bring it onto the screen. Maybe we should rally for the second order.
Second order closes on 31st of August.
Yes.
Okay. So keep the engagement up and give us a like, share the video, and comment away. Our winner for our Destination New South Wales chapter 2 weeks ago is Miss Athena Chu. Thank you so much.
Yay, congratulations.
Congratulations. Tonight, we have a set of 2-in-1 packing cube compliments from Real Europe to be given away to the highest engager.
Yes. So now please join us to welcome Renato.
Hello, Singapore. This is Iceland calling.
Nice to see you again.
Nice seeing you. I just learned that you were Googling up where Greenland is located.
Yes.
So I Googled up how warm it is in Singapore. And here are my results. Singapore right now, it says on Google, it's 29 degrees.
Oh.
Now cut that in half. And you get to Iceland because it's 14 degrees in Iceland. And cut that again in half, and you get 7 degrees, and that is Ilulissat in West Greenland. So you choose.
And that is summer. And you are in the middle of summer in Iceland and Greenland.
Exactly. We call that fully air-conditioned countries. We don't charge extra for it.
There will never be any electricity hike in Iceland or Greenland.
You don't have to shop for air conditioning.
Correct.
I learned that when I was in Singapore that you go indoors to cool down. We go outdoors and cool down. That's the difference.
You are right. You are right. In Singapore, if we want to go cool down, we just have to run indoors and we'll cool down immediately.
Yeah. We run outdoors, but we run quickly indoors again because it's much warmer indoors.
Well, also, do you charge for heater?
In Iceland, actually, heating is very inexpensive because we use geothermal hot water. So that is not expensive. In Greenland, it's a different story. So they actually, rather dress more in order to have to heat less the houses because that can be very expensive.
I see. Okay. Yeah, I think we are going to understand more about Greenland as you talk about it later on.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah. Okay, Athena asks, anyone plays the game Plague Inc.? Okay. I cannot answer this question because I'm not a gamer.
I think it's a board game. I've not heard of it also. So she was sharing that Greenland is the most difficult country to infect in the game. I
In
think,
reality, it is also in reality.
yeah. I think for anybody to get, it's because how inaccessible Greenland is
Mm,
to anybody, I would say. That's why.
yes, yes. So to our viewers, please continue to give us likes, comment, and share the broadcast. If you have any questions about Greenland, feel free to put them in the comment and we will respond later during the Q&A session. Remember, we have a 2-in-1 packing cube to be given away tonight. Now it's time to take a back seat and enjoy the presentation.
Before Renato takes over the presentation, I'd like to share a couple of slides with everybody. So for all our active holidays, you can refer to our website at www.travel-wander.com. Please subscribe to our mailing list to receive our e-newsletter every Friday to keep up to date on the latest ongoings at Travel Wander. Where can you find all our Greenland packages? You can find it on our website. Search under Destination Greenland. You can also find all our past trips, photos, and videos on our social media platform on Facebook and YouTube.
All right. Singapore, welcome again to the Greenland presentation. My name is Renato and I will discover with you together the place called Greenland. Lesson number 1, Greenland is not green. And here with the presentation is not over, just starting. So what I'm talking about today is where is Greenland? Why should you go there? How do you get there? Facts and figures, the climate, the regions of Greenland, and the activities. As in many maps or world maps, Greenland is either green or actually it should be white. Greenland is located between Europe and North America. It's actually very close to Canada, and it's only a 2 hours flight from Iceland. One problem is Greenland is the name. As you can see, this big island, which is actually the world's biggest island, is not green at all. It is very white because 80% of Greenland is ice. So Greenland should be called Iceland, while Iceland should be called Greenland. But here we go, it's a confusion between the two countries. So Greenland is not green, Greenland is 80% ice. So there we come to the question, why should you go to Greenland and what will you see in that country? Yes, you will see ice and icebergs. Remember, 80% of the country is ice. So yes, you're definitely going to be seeing ice. Now the 2 white islands on the picture, those are not islands, those are icebergs. And those who know about icebergs know that only 10% of an iceberg is visible. 90% of the icebergs is actually below surface of the water. So icebergs are really big. So these icebergs you see on the pictures, they are huge. And that means the smaller the boat, the safer you are cruising between those icebergs. So usually the large luxury cruise ships don't want to get close to such icebergs as you have here on the picture. So the smaller the boat, the safer you are, the easier it will be to navigate between icebergs. Then we have more ice. Here, for example, we have a picture of the Calvin Glacier, from the ice fjord in Ilulissat. This is the ice fjord that produces the most ice of any glacier in the world. Then we have more ice. Here we get to a Calvin Glacier, so it's the edge of the main glacier meeting the ocean where large icebergs break off. So it's basically the birthplace of icebergs, which then sail through the fjord out into the ocean. So it's all about ice and icebergs and glaciers. But in Greenland live also people. It's a 56,000 people live in Greenland. That means there are small towns, villages, and settlements. As you can see on the picture, these places are very colorful. But one thing is important to know, there are no roads connecting these villages, settlements, or towns. So you can only drive within the town or village in Greenland, meaning probably 10 minutes is the maximum you can drive from one end of town to the other end of town. But you will never leave by car any of the Greenlandic settlements, villages, or towns. There's another settlement here, also very colorful, that is located in East Greenland, surrounded by high mountains. As I mentioned, 56,000 people live in Greenland, so we have the Inuit/Eskimo culture, but let's stick to the name Inuit. So we have the Greenlandic people, and especially in the remote places, they still practice the normal survival habits of hunting and fishing, and whatever people fish and hunt, they use from that animal to produce also their clothing. So we will see, for example, here the people are dressed in reindeer clothing. So they use whatever nature provides in order to make instruments, weapon, clothing, shoes, and of course, getting the food. Internet is not big in Greenland because it's very remote and very difficult to install. So the old way of communication is the drum dance. So that using a drum and then moving their eye or the eyebrows and making certain sounds is the way of storytelling in Greenland, again, especially in the remote locations. So here you have another person, a fisherman dressed in a polar bear suit and reindeer jacket, and probably he's wearing seal boots. So he's going hunting with his sledge out into the ocean in the winter time when the ocean is frozen. Then we have here a man practicing his Inuit religion. Now, the Inuit spiritual beliefs, they are especially practiced in the remote communities, so not necessarily in the capital city of Nuuk. Here you have a gathering of Greenlandic people, again, all dressed in basically seal costume or seal clothing and shoes. And then one lady, she is wearing her national costume. Here we have a couple of kids. On the National Day, they all dress up with the national costume, which is basically passed on from one generation to the next one within the same family. So these young ladies, again dressed in the national costume, they show you that even iPhone exists in Greenland, but getting free Wi-Fi is another story. When talking about story, then we have the Tupilak art, which belongs to the Inuit spiritual religion or beliefs. The Tupilak is an artwork, and basically they are a symbol of the Inuit religion, and they kind of show a little monster, which is a symbol of witchcraft. And those artwork and symbols are usually produced out of animal objects like bone, tooth, but sometimes they use also hair and skin, and sometimes they use stones to produce those artwork. Kayak is a Greenlandic word, and kayak is basically the most practical transportation there is in Greenland, because navigating between those big icebergs, it's simply easiest to do by kayak. And still today, the local people use the kayak as a form of transportation, a form of going hunting and fishing in the summertime. Another form of transportation are the Husky dogs. The dogs are kind of the car of Greenland, since there are no roads connecting the different towns and villages and settlements. People use, especially in the winter time when the ocean is frozen, the husky dogs, putting a sledge behind it and go out fishing and hunting or going to the next settlement. The husky dogs are not pets. They're not really house animals. They're really working animals. Again, they kind of use it as the car of moving from one place to another. Talking about animals, I would like to introduce a little bit the wildlife of Greenland. One of the most unique animals and only existing in Greenland is the musk oxen. Probably people think that's like a giant buffalo or a big cow, but actually it is a goat. So this is the biggest goat in the world. So the musk oxen only exists in Greenland. It's either in East Greenland or in a certain area in West Greenland where you can find the musk oxen. And instead of eating a hamburger, you could maybe eat a musk burger. So musk ox is a very good meat, and people use it, for example, to eat burgers in Greenland. Then they have reindeer. Reindeer is also an animal that could be used for transportation, but mostly it is a source of meat in Greenland. They have the Arctic hare. They have the seals. And of course, there are whales. And whale watching in Greenland is easy. Basically, each time you take a boat going out into the ocean, you don't really need to book a whale watching tour. Every time you're on a boat, you're probably going to see whales. So whale watching or going to see whales is very easy in Greenland. And then usually get the question, do we see polar bears? And my answer is, you don't want to see a polar bear. Because polar bears, when they get near to people, it's probably a sign that they are very hungry. And it's no way that you ever will outrun a polar bear. So I would just say, hopefully you will not see a polar bear. Otherwise, you might just not return to Singapore. So polar bears do exist in Greenland. They're usually very remote. They're out on the ice. And usually if they get near to villages and settlements, the polar bear has to be basically shot. People have to try hard to get rid of the polar bears near to villages because they're really, really dangerous. Then comes the question, how do we actually get to Greenland? You can only get to Greenland from two countries, either from Denmark, so from Copenhagen, the Danish capital. That's a 4.5 hours flight to get to Narsarsuaq in West Greenland. Or you can fly from Iceland, and that would be either 2 hours to South or East Greenland, or 3.5 hours flight from Reykjavik to West Greenland, which is either Nuuk or Ilulissat. So only from Denmark and Iceland you can actually fly to Greenland. From Iceland, you have much more connections to get to Greenland because we can use smaller airplanes, meaning we have more landing options in Greenland. Because the main problem in Greenland is that the airports are very small. So they only have one airport called Kangerlussuaq where a large aircraft can land. Otherwise, the airports or the runways are very short, meaning they need airplanes of 27 to maximum 50-seater that they actually can land in Greenland. So from Iceland, you can fly to Narsarsuaq in South Greenland or Kulusuk in East Greenland. That's a 2-hour flight. Or you can fly to Ilulissat or Nuuk in West Greenland. But then we only use a 27-seater aircraft, and that would be about a 3.5 hours flight. You can also get by cruise ship to Greenland. But here, let me tell you a few things. The large luxury cruise ship, generally they do not like icebergs. And there are a lot of icebergs in Greenland. So if you go on a large cruise, it means you will stay on the ship And hopefully you can make a landing / shore excursion in Greenland if there are not too many icebergs. Otherwise, you might have to have a long transportation by Zodiac to get on land, which takes a lot of time when you are several thousand passengers. But it's a luxury way to get to Greenland, but landing on land, really, ashore or going on shore, is not really guaranteed when you take a large cruise. When there are other ships going there, they call it the expedition cruises. These are a smaller ship, usually 100 to 150 passengers. These are the same vessels that go to Antarctica, so the kind of icebreaker boats. And they have it easier to navigate between the icebergs or even the frozen sea. So these are, let's say, more like the 3-star type of ship. Some of them are also luxury, but in general, they are more like practical than luxury in order to get to the more remote areas and can really deal with the icebergs and the frozen ocean. Once you get really near the coast, or you fly to Greenland and you want to do excursions out of your place where you're located at, you take a boat, because since there are no roads connecting places, it means you will have to take a boat to do excursions. So on the bottom left, you see what we call a large Greenlandic boat. And on the bottom right, you see what we call a smaller excursion boat. The smaller, the better, because it's simply safer to navigate between those giant icebergs. But the best way actually to navigate in Greenland is the Zodiac boat, because a Zodiac doesn't need any harbor or any bridges. They can go and land anywhere. On flat icebergs, they can actually even basically drive on top of an iceberg with the Zodiac boat. Those are usually used to get from a cruise ship on land, or when you travel in South Greenland, because they don't have so many harbors there. So the Zodiac is actually the most adventurous, but also the most practical way to navigate in Greenland. A few facts and figures about that country. The population has 56,000 people, meaning it has about 50,000 in West Greenland and only 6,000 people in East Greenland. So East Greenland is really not very inhabited. It's very remote. They even have their own Greenlandic language called East Greenlandic, which is different than the language in West Greenland, which is West Greenlandic. And they really don't understand each other that well. But probably also they hardly ever meet each other because they're really far away. So in between is a giant ice field separating the east and the west. Nuuk is the capital city of Greenland, has about 18,000 inhabitants. Greenland belongs politically to Denmark, while geographically it belongs to North America. So when the ocean is frozen, you almost can walk over to Canada. Then for anyone who needs a visa to get to Europe, it would be a Schengen visa issued by the Embassy of Denmark. And again, Greenland is 80% ice. The rest is really ocean and mountains. And as I informed in the beginning, there are no roads connecting villages and settlements. Therefore, you cannot do any self-drive tour in Greenland. How big is Greenland really? It's the world's biggest island. It's about the same size as Saudi Arabia or Indonesia, which might give you an idea. What do people eat in Greenland? It's mainly based on marine mammals like seals and whales. Of course, people eat fish and seafood, which is also the main export out of Greenland. Then people eat the reindeer, the muskox, basically whatever wildlife they have, also seabirds. Maybe for the food, I wanted also to mention that for vegetarian travelers, Greenland might not be the most practical destination. Simply, you can't really survive that cold weather just by eating salad or vegetables. So a Greenlandic vegetarian meal could as well be just 2 slices of white bread and some cheese in the middle, and that's about it. So frozen vegetables are probably a typical thing in Greenland, but it would be, of course, imported. So mainly people eat the local animals they have, fish and seafood and seabirds. What is the best time to travel to Greenland? For me, Greenland is really a summer destination, and summer in Greenland means mid-June to mid-September, because that's the time when there are actually flights going to Greenland. Because if there's no flight, there's no way to get there. And if there's nothing to do in Greenland, basically you don't need any flights. Because the only mobility in Greenland is really the boat, and that is when the ocean is not frozen, and that would be mid-June to mid-September when you can use a boat to do your touring. Also, when people ask how expensive is Greenland, I would say calculate with a budget of about 2,500 euros from Iceland, so meaning the flight from Iceland, 2 nights, 3 days in Greenland, or about 3,200 euro plus when you travel from Iceland and back for 5 days, 4 nights. Just to give you an idea what pricing to expect, adding Greenland as an add-on or extension program to Iceland. But for example, if you travel to Europe and you're already in Denmark, you might skip Iceland and just travel from from Denmark to Greenland. And the pricing would be even a little bit higher because the flights is longer from Denmark to Greenland. Now, the important thing is the mobility. And if you are not able to move around, there's nothing to do. So mobility in Greenland really means the boat when the ocean is not frozen. And that is mid-June to mid-September. And again, the smaller the boat, the safer it is, and the easier you can navigate between the giant icebergs, the deeper you can get into the fjords near to the actual large Icelandic glaciers. Another mobility would be when the ocean is frozen, and that is snowmobile or dog sledge. But this is in the winter, and you're not really getting very far by snowmobile or dog sledge. And don't forget, it's going to be really cold in Greenland in the winter time. And there are several months of the year with basically zero mobility or zero transportation. And that is usually mid-April to mid-June and September to beginning of December, because that's the time when there's too much ice for the boats, but the ice not solid frozen and safe enough to be on top of the ice with a dog sledge and snowmobile. So therefore, mid-June to mid-September is really the only practical time to visit Greenland. In the winter time, you really need clear reasons why to go there, and usually that would be dog sledging and northern lights. But there is always a problem traveling in the winter time because the weather can be very rough. Flights could be delayed or even cancelled. So for me, again, Greenland is a summer destination. So what can you expect in regards of weather and climate in Greenland? As I said, for me, Greenland is a summer destination, and that means it's also the time when we have up to 24 hours of daylight, zero darkness, when you have the midnight sun. What is spectacular about Greenland is how clean and the air is. So the air quality is superb, means you can see very far. And if you do a hiking tour, you have to be careful. The next mountain looks very nearby, but it's just because of the clear view. You might have to walk a long time to get there. So about the climate itself, how hot and cold it gets, it varies a lot. As I've said in the beginning of the presentation, today in Ilulissat is 7 degrees. And Ilulissat can as well get 25 degrees in summertime, and it's really nice. So it's a lot of variation in the climate. So the average temperature in the summertime, which is June to August, is about 10 degrees Celsius. The hottest temperature measured in Greenland is actually 30. That was in South Greenland. Winter is a total different story. So the average temperature in the winter is about minus 15 degrees, but especially when you are able to travel there in February and March, you could as well expect minus 25 to minus 35 degrees. And the coldest temperature ever measured in Greenland was minus 86 degrees. So that's really, really cold. One thing about our Greenlandic climate is it is very dry, it has low humidity, and that is again helps for the clear view, and it helps that the cold temperatures are not felt as cold as they really are. When you travel in summer to Greenland, you will have to bring anything from warm clothing to a t-shirt, because Greenland is not a very windy place, meaning they have a very solid weather, and if it's sunny, with all the reflection of the sun in the ocean and on the ice, it can get pretty warm. So sometimes Greenland really has the t-shirt weather. But especially once you go out into the ocean, it usually gets a little bit more windy and definitely much cooler. So you always need to bring warm clothing along when you do your boat trips. So actually it is warmer towards going to the large glacier compared to going into the ocean. One thing about the weather is fog. Fog is a typical thing in summertime in Greenland, especially in the capital city of Nuuk. And that's why it's not always reliable when you fly to Nuuk, because simply flights might be cancelled due to fog. So in general, in tourism, we try to avoid Nuuk, the capital city. Anyway, there's not a lot to see there. It's not very Greenlandic. So once you go to Nuuk, the capital city, you don't really see icebergs and glaciers. You don't see any husky dogs. And that means that there's really not very much Greenlandic to see there. So we'd rather focus on other areas, which I explain afterwards. Of course, Greenland has an issue about global warming, which might sound strange when you have this average temperature of minus 15 degrees in the winter and only average temperature of 10 degrees in the summer. But actually, it is getting warmer in Greenland, affecting the weather, affecting especially the melting of glaciers and ice. And this means the more the glacier melts, the more icebergs there are, which is kind of an attractive thing, because you want to go there for the icebergs, but too many icebergs could also affect your transportation. That's why the large cruise ship might have a trouble if the global warming is very big, meaning there's going to be more icebergs affecting the cruising of the large ships. And then it changes the attitude and the survival of the wildlife and other aspects of life in Greenland. So how do you dress when you go in summer to Greenland? You dress in layers. Means you have to dress like an onion. You put on a t-shirt, then a shirt, then a sweater, and then a kind of, let's say, windproof and rainproof jacket. And you just take off clothing if it gets too warm. Since you spend most of the time on a boat, traveling around, you definitely need gloves and headwear even in the summertime. You also need good boots or kind of the Timberland type of shoes to walk around, because you will be mostly traveling just on nature sites, and hiking or walking is a big part once you're on land in Greenland. Another thing people might simply forget is you need to bring sunglasses, sun cream, and lip balm to Greenland because with 24 hours of daylight and often very sunny, the reflection on ice, the sun reflection on ice and water can be really, really strong. And if you look at the people in Greenland, they are very dark because of that dry air and that enormous sun reflection they have during the summertime. So getting a sunburn is actually very easy in Greenland. That's why you need to bring sun cream along. Another thing less pleasant are the mosquitoes. There are mosquitoes, especially from beginning of June to about beginning of August, and they can be pretty aggressive. So if you have, bring a mosquito net along to put over your head. And definitely you need to bring a mosquito spray. So whatever works in the tropics in sense of a mosquito repellent, bring the same one along to Greenland. So while Iceland, for example, doesn't have any mosquito issues, Greenland has it, especially in certain places like Kangerlussuaq and in certain areas of Ilulissat. Now, I would like to introduce the different areas of Greenland where tourists actually travel. The most popular destination for the Asian travelers is West Greenland, a place called Ilulissat. Ilulissat is located at the Disco Bay, and it has the best infrastructure for tourism and is absolutely the most popular destination because it has everything that you imagine Greenland to be. It has the giant icebergs, it has the UNESCO ice fjord, it has the calving glaciers, it has also an enormous good mixture of modern and traditional Greenlandic life and culture, and of course it has the Husky dogs. In Ilulissat live roughly 5,000 people and 3,500 Husky dogs. It also has a 4-star hotel. It has a couple of very good restaurants. It has banks, ATM, supermarket. It has taxis. And the ideal time to spend in Ilulissat is really 3 to 5 days, so 2 to 4 nights. So that's probably you will not travel all the way from Singapore just for 3 to 5 days to Ilulissat. That's why Greenland is usually a combination with Iceland or with mainland Europe. So once you get then also to Scandinavia, to Denmark, then you probably would add on a Greenland as well. The reason is simply again that the mobility and transportation, since you cannot drive anywhere, it means from Ilulissat you can only go really either north or south by boat, and that you can cover everything within 3 to 5 days. Another location, especially for longer stay in Greenland and especially for the adventure and active travelers, is South Greenland. The airport is called Narsarsuaq in South Greenland. And the reason why people go to South Greenland is really for the outdoor activities like hiking and walking. You can also easily go glacier hiking. People like fishing or angling. You can do zodiac trip or kayaking between the icebergs. Also, it's rich of Viking history and is actually a UNESCO site of Viking history. So this is basically when the Vikings came from Norway first to Iceland, continued to South Greenland. And what happened basically is when the Vikings came from Norway to Iceland, they ended up in an area called Vatnajökull Glacier. So they saw ice and they asked, what's the name of this land? I don't know, never been here before. Oh, it's ice, let's call it Iceland. Later on, they continued their journey towards North America and came to South Greenland. So they asked again, what's the name of this country? No idea, never been here before. Oh, it looks very green. Let's call it Greenland. But they did not look over the rock to see there's 80% ice. That's basically why the Vikings wrongly named the two countries Iceland and Greenland. Just kind of the story how the name giving worked. South Greenland is also the only location where there are hot springs in Greenland. And there are several small towns which are easily connected by boats. So in South Greenland, we recommend that you stay there 8 days because there's enough to do, enough to see, to stay for such a long time. So if you do Greenland kind of as a mono destination, I recommend do that in South Greenland. Then we also have East Greenland, which is only 2 hours flight from Iceland, while South Greenland would also be 2 hours flight, but West Greenland is actually a 3.5 hours flight. So East Greenland, there's 2 places there. One is called Kulusuk, and there is located the airport, which you take usually 50-seater aircraft from Iceland to Kulusuk. And if you want to continue to Tasiilaq, you take a helicopter, usually 7 to 9-seater, and fly over the mountain to get to the place called Tasiilaq. East Greenland is the least westernized, or let's say the most primitive part of Greenland. Nicely put, it's the most authentic part of Greenland. That means also this is an area that has been last discovered in Greenland, so that we found out, the Westerns found out that the people living there, and still today survival is much more important and has much higher priorities than servicing outside visitors. So you have to know that when you go to Kulusuk and Tasiilaq in East Greenland, you have to be a rather flexible person. You cannot expect that people do everything for you just because you're there, because really survival is the main priority of the people there. And if at the same time comes the first or maybe only ship with goods from Denmark, yes, everybody will go to the harbor to get their share of the delivery coming from the mainland in Europe. So that day, probably no excursion will be offered. So we usually say when you go to East Greenland, you have to be a flexible person, and probably it might be just enough to be in East Greenland, maybe sit on a bench at the harbor or in the center of the village and just see how local life functions. And you can do your own hiking into the valleys and along the fjord. There are sometimes boat trips between the icebergs, but again, you need to be kind of a flexible person. You probably need to love doing photographs because you're really going to one of the most spectacular locations in Greenland and really where authentic life is still happening. It's probably one of the last remaining unspoiled places on Earth. Also in East Greenland, because of the limited mobility, the ideal stay would be 3 to 5 days, and you do that out of Iceland. There's no other way to get there than out of Iceland. And one thing is, I don't really recommend combining regions in Greenland. So you either choose East Greenland, South Greenland, or West Greenland, and don't really combine it because the mobility is so complex and so expensive. And if due to weather anything would be cancelled, your whole program might become a mess. Now, talking about activities, it's like, what can you do there? A place with so much nature, scenery, and landscape, yes, is an adventure paradise. So hiking is probably, let's say, the most logical activity you do in Greenland, especially South Greenland and East Greenland has wonderful mountain panoramas. So hiking and walking is really the real thing, how to explore Greenland on land. But since the water is the main highway of Greenland, yes, you do boat trips. And again, the smaller the boat, the safer you are, the easier it will be to navigate between giant icebergs and the deeper you can get into the fjords. Because you don't want to be just out on the ocean, you want to be more sheltered, to have a good combination between mountains, glaciers, icebergs, and the Inuit people living along those fjords. Kayaking is probably one of the most spectacular activities, and you can see how close you get to the icebergs, and some of them have these arches where you actually can go and paddle underneath the icebergs. So kayaking between icebergs is one of the most spectacular thing, and you might remember it's the most authentic transportation of Greenland where the locals still use today the kayak to go out fishing and hunting. Yeah, the tourists do that with more the modern type of kayaks, and it's one of the really most spectacular activities you can do. Of course, they're guided tours. They're usually not in a sightseeing bus since there are no roads, so you go by boat and then you go on land, and the guide will explain you everything there is to know about the ice and the glaciers and the Inuit cultures and the global warming, just to bring you Greenland closer and give you a good understanding of it. But one, for me, main reasons really why to go to Greenland is getting away from the crowds, going to the end of the world, and you kind of want to be the only person sitting on a rock and staring at the ice, at these giant icebergs. And for me, this really means when I calm down and just sitting there, looking and staring at the icebergs, listening to their movements, to their cracking, to the pushing and turning. This is really like drama of nature. So it's one of the best theaters that nature can provide you. So really the reason to go to Greenland is ice and icebergs and sitting there on a rock. And this is, for example, in Ilulissat, at the Ice Fjord. Is a UNESCO site, the UNESCO Ice Fjord in Greenland, in West Greenland, which you just can have your own only spot for yourself and just look at this enormous icy scenery there is. Then you can also do flight sightseeing or flight seeing. So there's small aircraft, 3 to 5 seater, and you do your photography tour over the icebergs and the glaciers and mountains. So usually all those everybody has a window seat. Some of the windows you can even open in order to you put your camera through the window to take those spectacular photographs. One very unique thing you can do is the coastal ferry. Now, this is not a cruise ship. This is a local ferry that the local people use in the summertime to move from South Greenland to Nuuk and from Nuuk to Ilulissat. And this is really you sharing a ferry with local people. It's nothing luxurious about it. It's just the only really transportation there is, except of course aircrafts and helicopters, to move from one town to another. And for me, this is one of the most amazing ways how to experience Greenland, because you travel along the coast from south to Nuuk and on to Ilulissat, which takes a couple of days. And every time you get to the harbor, your heart is almost laughing and crying along with the local people, because that's the time for the local people when they say hello to their family members and friends who have been away for a long time and come back to their settlement or little village, which is not reachable by flight or not reachable by land. So the only way is the ferry in the summertime. Or maybe it's the youngsters who decide to leave their community and go to Nuuk to the university or for work. And you really see the whole village is showing up when that only ship comes like once every week during the summertime to bring goods, but again, bring their friends and family members or pick them up to go on a journey to another settlement or town. And it's everybody in the village and town shows up, and it's this crying and laughing and joy that is all at the same time. So you are along on a boat with basically 90% of Greenlandic people. Very few tourists use that. So if you want an authentic way to see more parts of Greenland, so from south to west, it would be the coastal ferry. But it's actually very expensive and it's a long trip. And of course, it's also weather depending. Then anyone who likes fishing and angling, that's possible in different locations in Greenland. And of course, you could also do sea angling when you go into the fjord. And many of those organizers, they will use whatever the catch of the day to make your lunch or dinner. Whale watching, already mentioned before. In general, I don't say book a specific whale watching tour, just whenever you're out in the ocean, it's probably a big chance to see whales. And for me, one of the most amazing excursion is when you are in Ilulissat in West Greenland, do a midnight cruise. Just imagine yourself out on a flat ocean surrounded by giant icebergs. The ocean is orange, the sky is orange, you have the midnight sun, and you just need one or two humpback whales next to your boat. That is just perfect life. That is all why you wanted to go to Greenland. For winter, for me, the main reason why anyone would want to go to Greenland in the wintertime is dog sledging, because that's then again the only transportation in the wintertime besides of the snowmobile, because the ocean will be frozen, you cannot use the boat, and again, there are no cars. So the dog sledging, but honestly, I find it would be much easier going to Lapland in Scandinavia, to Canada or Alaska for the dog sledging than Greenland, because it is very cold. It could have giant blizzards in the winter time. So it's not the best time to visit, but the reason why you would visit in the winter time would be the dog sledging. And another really amazing activity is meet the locals. And the Greenlandic people have an activity called kaffemik. And that means it's actually like a coffee or tea time in Greenland. So Greenlanders don't really drink tea, they drink coffee, and it's kind of coffee and cake. And usually the local people just invite everybody they know to their homes, and it's the chatting and gossiping happening. When there are foreigners coming, it's usually more the older generation of Greenlandic people opening their doors to their homes, and they're very proud to show the pictures of their families, showing their clothing they have, the different artwork, and of course you have to taste their best cake recipe and drink coffee. So these kind of activities is easy to arrange, for example, in Nuuk or in Ilulissat. In other places which are more remote will be more difficult, but anyway, you will always meet the locals in Greenland because that's basically who lives there. So as a summary, why would you travel to Greenland is ice, more ice and more ice. So let's call it glaciers and ice. And it's the 56,000 inhabitants. So it's the Inuit culture. It's the unique wildlife they have there. And it's all about nature, scenery, landscape. And for anyone who is an adventure traveler and outdoor activity, it's one of the world's biggest wilderness there is. So perfect for hiking. It's amazing for kayaking between the floating icebergs. In the summertime, because that's the main season you travel, it's the midnight sun. I also put here the words of dog sledging Northern Lights on this slide, but since that is a winter activity, and again, it's not really the best time to travel, but if you travel in the winter, the reasons probably would be dog sledging and Northern Lights. And for anyone going to Nuuk, for example, if you take the coastal ferry, then definitely you will need to go into the National Museum, because there you will have the old mummies, so the 1,000-year-old mummies that were found under the glacier. And that's, of course, very, very unique. And that's in the National Museum of Nuuk. So for me, as a summary, is Greenland is a destination for well-traveled people that have really a high desire to travel to the end of the world. And if you go to the end of the world, don't go there for only 1 or 2 nights. Stay, if you can, at least 4 or 5 nights. Or in South Greenland, definitely you stay 7 nights. It's for people that want to see the most dramatic landscape of ice, any kind of sculpture ice can give you, the mountains, the glaciers, and the tundra, and the kind of wildlife there is in Greenland. And again, the Greenlandic people with their unique culture, it is really the reason to go there. So I also have to say, people who go to Greenland should maybe understand there's a certain privilege they get to be able to visit Greenland as one of the world's last frontiers. Why do I say that? Since there's only very few flights going to Greenland, and those airplanes are very small, as I said, 27-seater going to Ilulissat, for example, there's probably only 1 or 2 hotels in town. So you kind of need to be privileged to get space on that small airplane, get space on the 8 or 10-seater boat for your excursion, and get space in the 1 hotel in town. So make sure you really appreciate that privilege you get to be one of very few people being able to go to Greenland, not having to share it with a lot of other visitors. And it is really, really unique. So in other words, maybe for Asian perspective is look at Greenland kind of a destination like Papua New Guinea in Asia. Because in Papua New Guinea, you have a country with a lot of rainforest where people live in the rainforest and use the rainforest to survive on whatever the rainforest provides them. It's for survival. Greenland doesn't have any rainforest. It has only ocean and ice. So basically, Greenland is a kind of a Papua New Guinea, but in the Arctic world. So it's very remote, it's difficult accessible, and again, whatever the ocean and ice is providing you is basically the way of survival and creates the culture and history of that place. So this was my second webinar I did now with you in Singapore. So I explained Iceland first and Greenland now, and probably you learned that Greenland is not green at all. It's 80% ice. And herewith I finished my presentation and I am ready for questions.
Oh, thank you so much. We learned about Greenland today.
You still want to go there?
Yes.
Yes, for sure. Even more so after your presentation.
Yes, the desire just gets stronger.
Very good.
Things I've learned that kayaking in Singapore we kayak for leisure, but in Greenland it's a transportation necessity.
Yes.
And I also learned that Husky dogs in Singapore we keep them as pets, but in Greenland you have the dog transportation.
In Greenland, you would not pet those Husky dogs. They're very aggressive. They're more like wolves than dogs. And maybe one thing I forgot to mention is the Husky dogs, they're actually only north of Nuuk. So Nuuk is kind of more like in the 1/3 of Greenland in the south. So they don't keep the Husky dogs in South Greenland because there they have the domestic animals and they have a little bit of farming, so they cannot mix up the Husky dogs, for example, with horses, sheep, goats, or cows. And also not with like cats or dogs in your home. So the Husky dogs are separate and they're only in the northern part of the middle or northern part of Greenland. So that's why, for example, Ilulissat is also called the town of dogs because it's 5,000 people and 3,500 dogs. But there in Ilulissat, there would be no cats because they can just not mix up the Husky dogs since they're so aggressive with any domestic animals.
I
see. Now we understand.
Yeah. And I also learned that people in Greenland do not really eat greens.
Oh, yes.
No. They only have a green name, but no greens.
Yes, I think vegetarian visitors is just going to suffer.
Oh, yeah. You must stop liking cheese sandwich.
As you are presenting about what the vegetarian is going to eat, I just felt so sad. Just bread and cheese and some cold salad.
And probably salad would also not be more typical. It's probably frozen vegetables that brought from Denmark, which of course will be heated up. But fresh vegetables is just not a typical thing in Greenland. And they say salad just doesn't keep you warm.
Yes.
You need fatty food that keeps you warm. That's what it is all about.
Yes, that's true. So before we answer the questions from the audience, let's take a look at the results of the poll. We have thrown out all together 4 questions while Renato is presenting. The first question is, Would you like to view the icebergs in Greenland? 86% of our audience says, count me in.
I'm relieved.
Ah,
And Angeline just hit the nail. That will be the Instagrammable pictures I want to take. And then question number 2 is, who wants to go wildlife spotting in Greenland? This is a win. 100% of the audience say me. I hope to spot them all. Yes. Especially the masked oxen, huh? It looks, I mean, like the name is oxen, but actually it's a goat.
Yeah.
I'm quite surprised to learn that it's a goat.
Yes.
It looks nothing like a goat.
Yes. The third question is, I think this is a giveaway by Renato because he mentioned it at the beginning of the presentation. Guess the total human population for Greenland, and 92% say 55,000 people. And then the last question is, who's ready for an adventure in Greenland? 100%. All of us. Me for sure.
Yeah.
Yes. And
Okay, so
I also want to mention here about, the tours that we have for Greenland. The pricing tiers that we have is actually for this year, but I guess next year it wouldn't fluctuate so much. So that one we'll wait for Renato to advise us. But just want to give an idea to everybody who is tuning in, because you have heard Renato says that, okay, Greenland is exclusive, it's expensive. But then again, if you look at the inclusions that is included in the tour, actually Greenland doesn't sound that expensive, because you can find quite similar tours that is showcasing the main part of Europe at a similar price. So for an 8 days Greenland tour that is suitable for the outdoors, those people who like adventure and hiking, Renato is moving this group at a very small capacity of maximum only 12 people. And it includes the flight from Copenhagen, and the trip for 8 days costs 3,285 euros. So for what Renato is providing, it's actually very affordable, thinking about Greenland as such an exclusive and difficult to get to places. As Renato mentioned, it's the last frontier of the world.
yeah.
May I maybe mention in this case, for example, the
Yes.
competition to Greenland would be Antarctica.
Yes.
If you plan to go to Antarctica, it's a much longer trip, much less accessible than Greenland, and much more expensive. I assume an Antarctica cruise is anywhere from $12,000 onwards.
Yes.
And but it's also opposite season. So you would travel there probably in December and January to Antarctica, while to Greenland you travel in July, August. So it's opposite on the planet. And the difference between Antarctica and Greenland is that Antarctica is bigger than Greenland and therefore has more ice, and it has the penguins. So very important, the penguins live in Antarctica while the polar bears live in Greenland. But there is no local population in Antarctica. So if you want actually also to meet the people who live there, in Antarctica, it's only the foreign scientists who live there, but there's no local population, while Greenland really has the 56,000 people, the Inuits who live there. So that makes the difference between Antarctica and Greenland, and Greenland will be actually a good deal in price compared to Antarctica.
Yes.
Okay.
And then if you just want to go to Greenland to have a feel what Greenland is all about, if you remember, Renato mentioned about it's the West Greenland part where you have everything you want to know about Greenland. A 4-day trip departing from Reykjavik, including of the flight, costs 2,800 euros. So it's rather affordable if you put it into perspective where most of the things are included, including the European flight getting from Reykjavik. Greenland is, after all, not too far a reach.
Yeah.
Okay, over to you, Mabel, to get all the questions. I can see all the questions keep coming up. Yeah.
Correct. Okay, so let me start with the first question I have from Junman. He's asking whether can we get to see any northern lights in Greenland?
Yes, the Northern Lights can be seen especially in southern Greenland, so not necessarily in Ilulissat or the north. They are there, but the best region actually is South Greenland, and they are from September to April. But that is a problem. There are no flights going there in September to South Greenland, so you actually cannot reach it. So you have to make enormous efforts to get there. So for me, if you want to see the Northern Lights, probably there are much easier destinations like Lapland, Iceland, Canada, Alaska to see it than Greenland. Yeah, if you would be able to manage Nuuk, the capital city, all year, but then you might see the Northern Lights there, but there's really nothing to do during the time there are Northern Lights. So just going before the Northern Lights, I really don't recommend it. But if you have any other reasons, like a conference or you studies to do, you study global warming, yeah, then the Northern Lights will be there from September to April.
Okay. Okay, so another question that we have from Susan. She's asking whether we get to see the frozen waves that you shown in your presentation. There was this boat excursion with the frozen waves. So is there a particular season to see that?
Basically, you mean the frozen? It's basically we call it the ocean ice. Yeah, that is actually in beginning of summer. So basically in June, especially in the beginning of June to mid-June, the ocean is pretty much still covered in ice. So it's then the time when it's breaking up. From air, it looks like a mosaic. So it's kind of little pieces of flat ice or ice pushed together, and so the smaller boats can easily navigate between it. So the kind of like a frozen ocean is more visible in beginning of the summer, but sometimes it might even be too much ice and you kind of cannot get into the ocean. But for example, when you go to Ilulissat and you sit on the rock and look down the ocean, some parts of the bay and the fjord, they're simply covered in ice. So you will simply see a frozen ocean and you see that moving and pushing and cracking and turning of the ice.
I see. Okay, interesting.
So Ilulissat would be definitely the best place, but also actually East Greenland. When you fly into East Greenland, you'll have for basically all of June, they still have this kind of a frozen ocean. For me, from the air, this looks spectacular. It's really this kind of ice mosaic with some blue in between. So it's fantastic.
Wow.
You're painting such a beautiful picture in our minds right now.
Yes.
Okay, we have a question from Jaren. He's asking whether is it easy to book a boat excursion when you arrive in Greenland, or is pre-booking necessary?
Yeah, you definitely have to pre-book. So basically, you don't just take a flight to go to East Greenland. You have to pre-arrange everything because there's no like public tours. So it means you need to charter a boat. And if you're alone or two people, how do you find a boat and a captain that is reliable? So this has all to be pre-booked. And that's why usually we prefer to sell tours and operate tours in South Greenland and West Greenland because their tourism is reliable. And so we can pre-arrange everything, and only if the weather is not cooperative, we have to make changes. But in East Greenland, it is just not reliable, so you cannot book it up front, and that means once you get there, it's just not sure if you find a captain with a boat. And then, and understanding also the East Greenlandic life is, if there's a wedding in town, everybody's invited. So you don't want to be the only one not going to the wedding because you have to do a boat trip. The same would be for a funeral. If there's a funeral, of course everybody shows up. So that's just the Greenlandic way because they're both basically cut off from the rest of the world 8 months a year. So they're not changing their habits just because 2 months of the year foreigners or outsiders can come to their place. So just have to know the difference. It has a lot to do with culture but also the weather and ice. So you definitely need to book up front in order to get a boat.
Okay.
Yes.
Good to know. So Waib is asking, what are the excursions boat for? Is it mainly for going out to be near the icebergs, seeing the whales and the seals?
Basically, Basically, you look at the boat like you would look at a car. I mean, even in Singapore, you probably can go with a boat up a river or out in the ocean to different islands. So if you just want to get around the bay of a place in Greenland, you will need to take a boat, except you hike. If it's possible, you even do hike to get to this place. So it's really your transportation. And yeah, mostly we try to travel along the coast and then actually into the fjords, because that is, let's say, the most interesting scenery, because you're surrounded by steep mountains, you will see waterfalls, and you navigate between those icebergs that come from a calving glacier. And to understand, once you get with a boat in front of a calving glacier, that might be 8 kilometers or even longer ice front, maybe up to 30 meters high. And so you sail just in front of that ice wall, no other way to reach it than by boat. So most places is simply not reachable except you have a boat. So you need the boat to see anything. Just relying on walking or being in town is just not enough, because again, the main reason are the icebergs, and just it kind of feels like being in a nutshell next to those icebergs, and this is just amazing. So yeah, you need the boat to see things.
Okay. And on a typical summer day, what would be the temperature range fluctuation? Maybe from day to night.
So the average temperature is 10 degrees. So it could well be that it's 5 degrees in the morning or in the evening, but suddenly, especially if you're in a sheltered place, it could also be 20, 25. For example, I remember when I went one summer, I had breakfast on the terrace of the hotel in a t-shirt. No way I would spend it indoors, the restaurant, because you had the most panoramic, breakfast terrace outdoors, and the weather was so nice, I could do it in a t-shirt. Because one thing that we Icelanders love about Greenland in summer is it's not windy. So for us, not having a cold wind, that is really, really nice. So you don't need that much clothes in Greenland in general. But the moment I go on the boat, the temperature is changing.
I agree.
For example, I can tell you, we went once on a boat into the fjord, and on the boat, because we didn't want to sit inside the boat, we wanted to be outside, and we also did some fishing. So we actually had to have gloves, because it was kind of very chilly, the wind coming down between the mountains. But once we got into the fjord, everybody was in a t-shirt. It was so nice. Basically, we almost were sweating in Greenland. So the changes in temperature can be a lot within the same day.
Okay.
Yes, it makes sense. As long as there is wind, you will just feel the chill comes in. If you don't have the wind, you don't feel as cold as what the temperature is.
Yeah, exactly. And because it's dry, it just feels more enjoyable. For me, as an Icelander, I would say that Greenland has a much more pleasant summer weather than Iceland, but the winter is a total different story. Then Iceland is really hot compared to Greenland.
Okay, so we have another question also by YE. He's asking whether there's any igloo hotels in Greenland during summer times.
So let me start with saying igloo is a fiction. It only exists in kids' books and in Walt Disney. Igloo means the real ice house never really existed. It was maybe an emergency shelter once built, but igloos don't exist in the sense how we imagine igloo. So, and Greenland doesn't have igloo hotels. Those igloo hotels are actually glass hotels, and they exist in Lapland, in Finland. But don't imagine to actually see an igloo or ice house. Now, to correct it a little bit, there's one hotel in Greenland that have the igloo rooms. These are made out of aluminum, so they're metal. And actually, when it's 24 hours of daylight and sun, it's like a microwave. So I do actually not recommend them at all because they can be so hot if the sun is shining on that metal and there's no air conditioning and you can't really open the windows. So I would not book any igloo room. It only exists, I believe, 3 or 4 in Greenland, but these are not the right structure.
I can imagine it's like being roasted, we are being roasted.
Exactly.
Renato, you are just so cruel. You dash all our fairy tale hopes about igloo.
I am so sorry. But again, I promised you ice and more ice and more ice. So
So we better build our own ice shelter and then imagine that is the igloo we all dream about.
I can tell you about the ice. When I went the first time to Greenland, or actually the first time to West Greenland, and now I am selling in Iceland, we have the Jökulsárlón Glacier Lagoon, which we are very proud. It's an amazing, beautiful ice lagoon with floating icebergs, and we have the Diamond Beach. But once I saw the icebergs in West Greenland, I really wondered how I can ever sell our ice lagoon in Iceland again, because those icebergs in Iceland are Mickey Mouse compared to those giant icebergs in West Greenland. And it's probably, you get there and you just start taking a picture and another picture, and every iceberg is more beautiful than the other iceberg. And you come home with 1,000 photos of icebergs, and you will never be able to decide which one was the most beautiful ones. And at midnight, they look more beautiful than during the day, and in the morning, the ocean is calmer. The icebergs are simply so photogenic and so amazing, and really, that's the main reason you go there. So no igloos, but iceberg paradise.
Wow, nice. Very nice.
And maybe to tell you just a fun story regarding the icebergs, to imagine how really big they are. We had once a couple booking, and they said we want a hotel with a room guaranteeing a view to the icebergs. So we booked that, and once I checked in, they called and said, sorry, we have a complaint. We don't see any icebergs. So I called back to the reception and said, please, have you not given the iceberg view to the guests? Of course. So I called them back, and they said, no, we don't see any icebergs. So I asked them, can you tell me what you see? We only see big white islands. Yes, the big white islands are the icebergs. So they are so big, people might just underinterpret it as an island instead of an iceberg. So just that you have an idea how huge those icebergs can be. And now with the global warming, the breaking of icebergs is much more than even before.
Yeah, which comes to a question by Angeline, but I will touch on that later. There is one more question by YE. He's asking, where do most of the tourists from Greenland come from? Are they from Europe, US?
It's probably about 80% from Denmark, because it belongs politically to Denmark. So it's a kind of a must-do for any Danish person to go once in a lifetime to Greenland. It's kind of their colony. So yeah, most of the people as tourists come from Denmark. And then it's probably more like Germany would be another country which brings a lot of tourists, because since there are no flight connectivity out of the US and Canada, which are actually close, they will have to fly first to Denmark or to Iceland in order to travel back to Greenland. So it's actually, I would say you will meet more Asian tourists than American tourists, even though it's very close. It's simply, for Asia, it makes sense. It's all the same direction. You fly to Europe and you continue west to get to Greenland. But the Americans actually have to travel first east and back west, and then back east and back west. So it's kind of too much flying the same route.
I see. Okay. So coming to climate change, Angeline is asking, how has Greenland been impacted by the climate change in terms of global warming?
Okay, first of all, it is the glaciers are retreating, meaning there's much more melting of the glaciers. It's rising the ocean level. It probably will affect the Maldives much more than actually Greenland itself, because it helps Greenland in a certain way. The more ice it melts, the more minerals they will find underneath the ice, but it will not help all the flat islands like in the Maldives when the ocean is rising. But one thing that definitely it shows, and because it gets warmer, but it's the wildlife behavior. Like, for example, the polar bears, they're really having a tough time now because their food source is getting further and further away from where they actually live on land. And the icebergs melt more, the ocean is less frozen than it was before. And that makes, for example, the polar bears much more stressed out. They are more desperate to find food. And once they get on land or near to people, they're even more aggressive than before. So it has, and it changes the culture, the way, for example, the fishermen, as I told you, there's this time of the year when the ocean has too much ice for boats, but not frozen enough for being on the ice with the snowmobile or the dog sledge. And that time of the year is actually getting longer and longer. So the accessibility on the ocean is getting less and less, affecting especially the people in the smaller communities. They are no longer safe to go fishing and hunting. They have to take much more risks to use the ocean. Since all the fishing and hunting is done on the ocean, it's done, depends really if it's either too frozen or safely frozen, and that is changing a lot.
I see. Yeah. I was just wondering, like where do the locals get their food sources? I think most of them have to hunt.
Yeah, I mean the general survival of the people is still the fishing and the hunting, and they really just fish and hunt whatever they need, and they share it. So it's not like this is my seal or this is my bird. You share it with the community because these are very small and remote communities. If it's, of course, it's different like in the place like Nuuk, the capital city. There, sadly to say, it is the live of social welfare. There's a lot of unemployment in Greenland simply because the Western world has taken away the purpose of natural hunting and fishing. We have affected their culture and religion a lot. So basically, they don't see the purpose anymore. They are moved from the little villages into the city, given an apartment, and they suddenly have to learn to live a civilized life, what we call civilized, and they're having a hard time. It's very similar, for example, with the Aborigines in Australia or the natives in North America. So these kind of conflicts were really civilizations who live from nature, who understand how to live with nature, get influenced by the Western world and basically said, no, you're too primitive, you have to become westernized, but they don't understand the purpose of westernized living. So yeah, they're supposed to go in a supermarket and buy food. Instead of going out fishing, they might have to buy canned tuna fish, which makes no sense to them because simply the climate has changed, but also basically how we want them to live is influencing too much. And if they don't have a job, they get the money from Denmark to survive, so social welfare. They become alcoholics because they have nothing to do, since we don't want them to kill seals, for example, or we don't want them to kill whales. But they don't kill it just to kill it. They kill it to survive. And as I explained in the beginning, they are using every bit of the animal for their clothing, their instrument, their weapons, their artwork, and of course the food source. So that's basically what is happening. So travelers to Greenland should have maybe their open minds and eyes to understand the conflict between really generation and civilization when the Western world tries to influence actually a very old civilization who managed through thousands of years to survive without any outside help.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there is this very conflicting interest here. Is like,
Yeah.
while we want to protect the wildlife to stop them from killing, but we are actually taking away their livelihood, and then instead of improving their life, do we actually make it worse?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But an interesting, let's say, more fun story, for example, is Greenlandic people who live outside Nuuk. Their main tourist attraction for Greenlandic people going into the capital city is the escalator in the only shopping mall there is in Greenland, which is in Nuuk. Now, you in Singapore, you have thousands of shopping malls, and of course, you are used to elevators and escalators. But there's only one escalator in Greenland. There's might be one or two elevators. So this is the biggest attractions for people coming outside the city. For them, it's a huge effort to come by boat, or maybe can afford once a flight to the capital city. And the first thing they do is they need to see the escalator in the shopping mall. They don't need to see the shopping mall, but the escalator is really the main thing. Just to have an understanding of how the culture is.
Yeah, I mean, I can relate to it. It's just like when we went to any of the theme park, the Disneyland theme parks or the Universal Studio, you must take that roller coaster.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's exactly the same. When they go to Nuuk, they have to go into that mall, not because of the mall, but because of the elevator.
Yeah, but I might get seasick on the escalator.
Okay, we have new questions coming in. There's one asked by Angelique. She's just wondering, how does seal and whale meat taste like? Is it similar to fish or goat, cow?
Okay, it's actually red meat. So a good, well-cooked whale is like a beef steak. It's actually very tender and very good meat, but it tastes. But if you overcook it, it becomes very oily and fishy and smelly. So it almost has to be like raw. So it has to be a little bit bloody, and it has to be red, which not everybody likes. But then it's really like one of the best beef steaks you can have, but it's whale. The seal is a little bit more chewy and rubbery. It's also red meat. If you overcook it, it's usually not the Western tastes. So in kind of like what the Greenlandic people do is they eat it from raw, like sushi. Basically, they just kill it and eat it right on the spot, start eating the meat. So it's really raw. But then for a longer conserving it, they actually overcook it. So it's a little bit like leather, but they can chew it for weeks. And so it's just depending if they want to eat it instantly, like sushi, or actually having it like more, as a snack for many weeks to hold. So
it's just like beef jerky.
Yeah.
You will always, if you eat seal, you will always find out that you eat something that you have never tasted before. But if you eat a well-cooked whale steak, you actually might believe you're eating beef.
I see. Okay, interesting. YF is asking whether the flight to Greenland, is it bumpy? Especially because we are using like smaller aircrafts.
I think it has only to do with how windy it is. So no, I think I have had several really easy flights. So no, I have encountered much worse flights going to Asia or North America on a big aircraft than that. But of course, it really depends on the weather. The main problem with flights to Greenland is actually the fog, because these airports are really cut into a mountain with very short runways. So if the visibility is not there, you can't simply fly. It doesn't happen that often, but it can happen, and that is especially in Nuuk and in East Greenland, because there the mountains are a little bit higher. It's easier in Ilulissat. It's more like hills where the airport is. And also in South Greenland, it's also surrounded by mountains, so you have the visibility is a main issue, and not really the bumpiness. Okay. And since the planes are usually so small, everybody has a window seat.
That's the perk.
Yes, you don't have to request for a window seat.
No. And social distancing is also very, very easy in Greenland. So anyone worry about social distancing, super easy.
Yes, yes. And then we have an audience, Yulan. She makes a very good comment that steamboat business, the hot pot business, will flourish in Greenland. But you can only operate from the month of mid-June until mid-September.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. Now this one. This question is by Junman. Okay, I'm saving it for the last because he's asked, if you have to choose one, would you recommend Iceland or Greenland?
That's a very difficult question to answer.
It's probably like asking if you prefer fish or meat. And especially if you like both of it. So the thing is simply these countries are not really related in the sense of they look the same. Iceland is basically a volcanic land, so it has really, it's a volcano land. Well, Greenland is an iceland with all the ice, and simply these two countries have nothing in common. Very few Icelanders actually have been traveling to Greenland, and Icelandic people, as close as we are, we can't believe really how different the two countries are. And even so, in Iceland, we have 11% glaciers, and we truly believe we have those biggest glaciers and the beautiful ice lagoons. Once we see the glacier of Greenland, it is just, you're speechless. And the Greenlandic people, they look like from a different planet because they just don't look like Europeans. They look like more coming from Mongolia or somewhere else from Asia than actually, the Europeans. Their skin is dark, they have dark hair, dark eyes. They are usually little smaller and chubby. And their language has nothing in common with any other language in Europe. So it is really like going to a total different planet. And even I call Iceland planet Iceland. Greenland is another planet on Earth. So they are two different countries. I personally, if you do the combination, I would always start with Iceland and end with Greenland, because I personally believe Greenland in the combination is the highlight between the two things. It's just because it's just somehow you really get the feeling you go to the end of the world, and you kind of just keep that as your last highlight, really. But to choose between, it's really like choose between fish and meat when you like both of it.
It's so difficult to make a decision because each of the islands actually offers quite different kind of experience.
Yeah.
So I think you gave the best.
But sometimes we have to ask basically what you want to do, because in certain ways Iceland might be better for some people or for some activities, while Greenland might be totally different for other people and for other activities. And maybe the understanding of the limited mobility is really, really hard for some people, not understanding there's just no way to go except you have a boat. And that is, even for Icelandic people, difficult because we're just so used to a car.
Yes.
Oh yeah, that's true.
Yes.
And my friend, for example, who went in the wintertime to Greenland, so everybody believes that Iceland is a very cold country. But in the wintertime, we have this average temperature of 0 degrees. So my friend went on a winter tour to Greenland, and she said, you can't believe what cold really means. It was this minus 35 degrees. And, she was so much looking forward to go for a dog sledging program. And she said, once I was there, I couldn't wait until the tour was finished, because all I wanted is to go back to the hotel and warm up because it was so cold. So that's why I say Greenland might just not be the ideal winter destination, as romantic it sounds to be on a dog sledge in the wintertime. When it's a blizzard and minus 35 degrees, that can really be cruel. So maybe you start building then your igloo shelter.
build our own fairy tale igloo during the winter month.
Maybe there could be an economy of building igloos in Greenland.
Indeed, indeed. I guess if you really want to do the dog sledding, you can do it in Scandinavia during the winter months. It's probably much more pleasurable in terms of
Yes.
experience. Yeah, and then if you really want to visit Greenland, maximize your time, maximize your expenses, go during the summer months.
Yes.
And
Right.
maybe there is just a funny story about also Greenlandic life is there's a French movie, a documentary movie that shows that a Frenchman married a Greenlandic woman and he moved to a small village in West Greenland. And he was growing up in Paris, in the center of Paris, and he had two children, which were then remained with his ex-wife in Paris. So the two kids said, we're going to visit our father in Greenland. And they were these typical, big city kids, having their normal habits of a big city. And they get into this tiny little settlement where everybody knows everyone. And, the first thing they had to go out is the father hunting seals. And he just said, okay, here, just eat. And, it's just that seal was just killed, had to eat it. But then especially what was funny is that they always went jogging. So they went jogging on the flat ice when the ocean was frozen. And all the Greenlandic people in the village stood there and looked at each other and said, what's wrong with these people? Why are they so much in a hurry? Then the Greenlandic people didn't hear or know this concept of jogging or running, because why would you do that? There's nowhere to go to, basically. So they thought always they were in a hurry while they actually were jogging to keep themselves also warm. So this just understands how different the civilization and the cultures are and how different people are. So how much we could have a misunderstanding, calling someone being in a hurry while he actually is doing sport.
It's unheard of that the Greenlandic people actually goes jogging.
Yeah, indeed.
And when we compare, for example, Iceland we are very proud of using our hot springs for swimming. So every Icelander knows how to swim. That's just compulsory in our country. So I asked once in Greenland, do you know how to swim? And they said, what's the purpose? Because the water is so cold, even if you can swim, you still die. So, so that's why they understood Iceland and Greenland is really different.
And you are just so close by, 2 hours flight away.
Exactly.
Only.
As close as we are very, very different.
Yes. That's a very good description between the two islands.
So you probably have probably to combine it and just do both of it.
Yes.
Yeah, that's right. Indeed.
Yeah, that is like you are experiencing culture from the two ends of the world.
Exactly.
Angeline is asking, is that movie you mentioning about Journey to Greenland? Is that the movie?
I don't know. It has a French title. I don't know. I would have to figure it out, and I can send it to you then.
Sure.
Okay.
There's also a movie called it's the American movie The Journey of Walter Mitty, or it's a Walter Mitty is the part of the title. Have you seen that one?
No.
There, for example, they try to have the fiction of getting to Greenland and renting a car. So in the picture shows the American lands in Greenland and says, I want to rent a car. And the Greenlandic person goes outside and says, would you like the red one or the blue one? So they only had 2 rental cars, and of course you couldn't get anywhere. So I can also send you the title of that movie. It was filmed in Iceland, but it shows part of it actually in Greenland. So, and just kind of the humor about, that there's a place where there's no car and you can drive.
I guess these 2 movies is very good to recommend to visitors who are going to visit Greenland. So watch it before you go. I guess then they will be able to relate to the culture when they are in Greenland, as the guy explained.
Yes, that's right. And speaking of movie, Renato has a very beautiful short video for everybody to see. I will post it into the comments so you can have a look after our Facebook session.
Yes, we will probably put it up as a post in a few days' time over the weekend.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think we have answered all the questions that our audience have posted to us. Yeah. So
we got it all covered.
Yep.
Yep. Okay.
Okay. So just a quick recap again to everybody on where you can find all our packages on Greenland. It's on our website at www.travel-wander.com. You can search under the destination Greenland. Next Wednesday on our Midweek Chatter with Wander Girls, we have our guests, Mr. David Ho from JT Dream, who will be coming on board with Sharon and myself to share about sports sunglasses. And next Saturday at 3:30 p.m., we have our Good Value with Wander Girls. So tune in to find out more as we showcase to you all the different sports sunglasses that we have from JT Dream.
Mm-hmm.
If you'd like to reach out to us, you may contact us via WhatsApp at our number +65 8714 3321, or you can also visit our website at www.travel-wander.com. Thank you very much, everybody, for joining us today. Thank you, Renato, for the lovely time, the great presentation on Greenland. We learned so much.
Yes.
I laughed so much.
Thank you for the eye-opener.
Yes, indeed.
And I just learned that you're selling sunglasses, which are essential when you visit Greenland.
Yes.
Yes, that's right. Okay, so before we log off, maybe let's take a group photo together.
Yeah, sure.
Everybody smile. 1, 2, 3. Okay. Thank you, everybody.
Thank
you,
you
Singapore, for listening. Thanks. Have a nice evening and stay safe.
You
Visit
too.
us soon.
Stay safe.
Bye-bye.
See you
Bye.
soon. Bye-bye.